Great. I'll try to be very quick. It's like surfing on very different projects, but just to give you an idea of how this relationship between my discipline, that is information design, and digital humanities developed for me. It's my perspective on that relationship that actually was more like the humanists looking at us. So when I met digital humanities as an area, it was more that they knew us. They were already looking at us much more than we were looking at humanities. Actually, we didn't at the moment. So in this seminal conference, for example, they were claiming that learning from communication design, interaction design, and industrial design will be vital for 21st century humanistic inquiry. So that for me was shocking. So they were thinking to us. Then in books, we read that digital humanists have much to learn from communication and media design. Wow, they were searching for us. And that happened on a day in 2012. The Stanford Humanities Center approached us because they were searching for different ways to represent the data they were collecting through this project that some of you may know, that is mapping the Republic of Letters, actually bringing together lots of different archives about correspondence between intellectual figures in the Enlightenment period. They were actually already trying to do some design, but without having designers involved. And that's where we joined to actually, I would say, in the best possible way by doing a workshop. So they invited us. It was in the summer of 2012, and we did a workshop. We worked together for a week, trying to know each other and then sharing our experiences. And what happened is that Giorgio, the guy with the glasses that you see here, then remained there for a year or more, and he helped developing this joint relationship between information design and digital humanities. And you can see here a kind of a representation of the work that we have done. You see, it was our peculiar way that time to represent data and information. It's like a Gantt diagram, but with the representation also of the intellectual figures we were working on and people that were working on that. So designers, and you can see myself somewhere there, yeah, in the middle. And then a lab has been created. So I think, again, it was like an ideal representation of what the collaboration between the two disciplines should be. This is the first initial setting of the lab. You see at the center was a joint initiative, the logo of my research lab at that time, density design, but it still exists. If you go on the website of the CESTA lab, there is a section that is humanities plus design. It's not design plus humanities, as I would suggest, but it's humanities plus design. The problems they shared at that time were very interesting. So they were already visualizing the data. Of course, there are many interesting and smart computer scientists at Stanford, so they were already using those competencies to create something like this. But then when they came to us, they said, okay, no, this is what we have, but it's not enough. How can a letter make a straight line between A and B? That's not what happens. We don't want to, this is good maybe for controlling flights, control towers. That's not what we want to see. That's not the phenomenon we are working on. And they were talking about something that I didn't think at that time. So data visualization could be rhetorical. So they were saying, Nicole Coleman was the technology specialist on that side. She said, visual language and the rhetoric adopted in the tool conveyed a misleading idea of well-defined and clearly perceivable phenomenon. You can see this aura of precision and accuracy that was not part of the data they had. That was for me like a revelation. We were speaking the same language, so to say, as designers, because it's true that subjectivity and uncertainty is an integral part of humanistic research, but it's also a very open challenge in the representation of data, even in the scientific community. Working with uncertainty, ambiguity, gaps, holes, that's something that is also very unclear to us as well at the moment, especially working on the data we don't have and how to visualize that. We're developing ways, so there is now this trend also of representing data in a kind of a more artisanal way, and it made the success of a couple of designers, one especially that was my PhD student, and now Giorgio Lupi became this kind of evangelist of the data humanism, and with a very specific way of representing data, like, hand drawing things. That was impossible to think about in the scientific community. But people are starting to bring these kinds of visualization methods also in libraries, in JavaScript, so that you can use that for developing your visualizations. That's something that is happening, and we're using these kinds of languages more and more. There were many other interesting questions, like, visualization and also reflections on what visualization is, that I think really created that connection between the two disciplines. So visualization, they said, it's not only present what we know, but also it's more like revealing what we don't know, or like focusing on the things that we cannot visualize because we don't have the languages yet, we don't have the means, we don't have the tools. That was something very interesting for us. And what I discovered is that also in relation to certain visual patterns, you can have very opposite reactions. Think to the graphs, for example. It's something very common in visualizing networking data. But at Stanford, for example, they were very skeptical about it. They use this term, graphs can be seductive, meaning that they can lead you in very different directions. And it's true, you can lay out a network in many different ways. There is no one way, you can play with that and really bring people in different directions in terms of insights. So what we did, for example, we created a different way of visualizing networked data that was bringing back to life something that existed in the past, the alluvial diagram, as a way to represent network data as categorical data. And they used it. That's a proof. In 2011, even before we did the workshop, they started to use a tool that we developed in our lab. They were thinking about the Sankey diagrams and alluvial diagrams already. This is the platform that we developed with them, integrating networks, different visual patterns as the bubble chart, maps, and the alluvial diagram. With skeptics, you have also lovers. That's what happened, for example, with philosophers. We partnered with, was a master thesis. We worked with the department studying Kant, and they had, in fact, a networked database to work with. It was about the relationship between the terms and the opera of Kant, all the body of work. And what they said, well, we have a relationship, it's a network, let's do a graph. And they tried, that's what they got at the beginning. We helped them in navigating different potential ways of, but then at the end, the point is, it's true, in some cases, networks can be useful. In this case, for example, you can see the terms used only once in the whole opera of the philosopher. So in that way, in that case, maybe one potential layout can be, but the point is that they didn't need that. So they had network data, but the point is that they wanted to see something else. Time was very important and was totally missing in these networks. So we designed something completely different, starting out of network that looked like graphs, but they could be, of course, represented in other ways. So we ended up designing this evolution using a bump chart that has a sort of appeal in certain contexts, a bump chart that represents the amount of times the occurrences of a certain word across time. And the funny thing is that everything started very digital, but the final outcome was a huge poster that they put in the office and that they were looking at anytime they had a doubt about a term. They were used to go and navigate, this poster. Another important milestone in the development of that relationship is a cost action that I was involved with. We were involved with. It's 4 years. 4 year is not really research. Is you know what it is. A cost action is just to create relationships and create a network of people. And in that case, since the beginning, I was leading the visualization and communication work package. We decided to embrace, since the beginning, this design sprint as a format. So forget about conferences, forget about meetings. Let's do only design workshops. It was not easy at the beginning to convince people, but then every time we met, we did something together. Designers and humanists, digital humanists, working together on data sets for 5 days as the format of the design sprint is made of. It's a Google format. And again, what we discovered is that the things that you're supposed to do in a design sprint are already part of the digital humanities world. So that's again part of the literature, is the foundational book about digital humanities, where you see that prototyping, beta testing with users is something that is should be integral part of also the other discipline. We did all this design sprint with designers this time, so lots of designers that we enrolled for that. And we didn't pretend, of course, that they became designers, but it was really sharing a common ground, working together and doing things, practically, hands-on. Typically, what you do is that on Monday, you unpack the problem. Tuesday, you sketching, really, pencil and paper. Wednesday, you make decisions, which sketch will move on the next stage. Thursday, you prototype, coding, actually, usually, is digital. And then on Friday, you have the results and then you test it. And that's what happened. Monday, a designer on the left and some humanists on the right, trying to understand. The designer was, wow, sketches. That's the longest step. Lots of sketches. Tuesday was very long as a day. And Wednesday, sketches were presented and discussed, and then we made decisions. We came back to the sketches the same day. And on Thursday was like the opposite. Designers hands-on talking, and the humanist like, wow, what's happening now? But what we had at the beginning and at the end, 5 days, was impressive. I think that was a very interesting setting. This kind of laboratory environment worked pretty well. And we used that again. Another project that we developed as in this kind of very joint, in-person activities, flying to Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, we redesigned completely the front end of the 6 Degrees of Francis Bacon project that you may know is about the social network of that specific person. And everything has been redesigned in a very collaborative setting. 2 weeks, hands-on doing this. Again, we did that again with another project. That's the last project big. This project was multi-year project. We developed at the research lab at Politecnico di Milano Density Design. Is Atlante Calvino, is the whole opera of Calvino revisited by 3 different scholars with 3 different novel approaches to investigate the opera. And everything, again, happened in a very, very collaborative way. We had so many sessions where we printed out the prototypes and annotating and design, but some of them, I think, really became sort of designers. They were trying their own specific visualizations with us supervising. And again, we came out with something, I think, unique. You can check yourself on the website. I don't have the time to go through all of that. So you have a website mainly. You can see here the different areas and that correspond to different investigations, unique investigation, novel investigations in the opera. But as we always do, we try to bring that knowledge outside, let's say not just on the form of the web, to try to reach different audiences. So we partnered, for example, with Corriere della Sera. La Lettura is a Sunday cultural supplement, and we visualized those different, we put that on paper and we try to make that accessible to a different kind of audience. Well, the end of the story, with this research collaboration, I think, is that what I learned is that really there are so many commonalities, not just on the way we think about data, the way we work with data is so similar that actually we ended up in 2 different PhD theses to develop this idea that there is a lot in common between research practices in both design and humanities. So looking at, for example, we developed this new idea of visualization as a form of research. So it's not, we used to do research through design, but maybe in the context of humanities, research through visualization makes more sense. And this other idea of design as a heuristic practice really is the testament of this kind of very close relationship. Well, I try to do that also outside, living in a way. Research is fine, is good, but what happens when you go outside? So I tried in another context. I have several hats, I would say, but with in other occasions, I tried to bring this approach outside. And for example, for the Biennale of Shenzhen in 2019, architecture, we worked very closely with a curatorial team, so the people that were in charge to select the projects that were exhibited in the pavilion. And we worked so the idea was to, like a meta design approach, let's try to represent the curatorial process itself. So we got all the data about what happened, so how many people submitted the projects and, from where, which were the people. And so we created the data set, we visualized that, and then we brought that into the pavilion, or actually outside the pavilion. And we developed what I think might be the longest visualization of data ever produced. Is 1 kilometer long. So the pavilion was 1 kilometer, and all around is wrapped by a representation of the curatorial process that brought the project inside the pavilion. I don't know, it was very experimental because I was in Boston, the Biennale was in Shenzhen, and we never had a contact with the people working on the visualizations, producing them. So, but pictures look nice, and so, and it apparently was good. Another project that has been done is the agency I'm partnered with, is the visual agency we work with. Is a side project. We like doing this kind of side projects. We partnered with the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana in Milano because they wanted to give access to people, access to the Codex Atlanticus they have in their premises in a broader, better way. So was really challenging because, they have this wonderful piece of work, but they had no data. So actually we had to go back to other sources, read them, and get all the data out of it, like reading. And we decided to focus on topics, so what these pages talk about. And so we got 140 topics at the beginning, looking at all these pages. Then we clustered that into 5 main subjects. And then we created the Excel file, actually, we worked with. It was huge, but it was possible because the person you see here on the left, Monsignor Braschi, was so involved and committed, and it helped us getting this USB pen with all the data. Also the images. We exhibited a project in Boston, and we had to travel the USB pen with us because the owners of the right of the pictures only allowed us to travel the data physically. That was really interesting so we had to do that. It's a kind of a anecdote, but we had this data, and then we decided how to visualize that. And again, it was close collaboration with the people in the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana. We decided to have like a glyph that was representing the page with, like a stack bar chart, the different amount of content you have, the different topics, and then 2 lines that were representing the position in the corpus, like the number of the page, basically, according to the person that assembled the Codex Atlanticus, and the date, so the year. So you have this element, graphical element, that is composite, is the basic unit of the visualization. Then again, we visualize that in different ways. We like to do that, create a system of communication for every work. So you have the website. These are all the pages of the Codex Atlanticus. You can reshuffle them, reorder, reorganize, and filter in many ways, and you can go deep into the real actual page and zoom in. Not online, there is, again, a limit threshold, IP, but if you go on the Pinacoteca, you have a web mobile application. I try to be quick and finish. But if you go there, that's the best experience you can have because there is an interactive touch screen where you can zoom in on the highest possible resolution you have. It's the only place actually where you can see that resolution for the pages of the Codex Atlanticus. Just a teaser of the project. There is no order. I mean, there is one person that decided the order of the pages. So what's yours order? So you can reorder the pages as you want according to multiple filters so that you create your own Codex Atlanticus. And that was the idea. Again, Corriere della Sera, we published some visualizations out of the interactive installation. And then we decided to do another side project that touched a concept, this is the last one that I want to share, that is like, what if pictures become data? So not just, numbers and text, but so we decided to treat in this other project that is about the Divina Commedia, together with a humanist in Bergamo. We assembled a corpus that didn't exist. All the visual, audio, illustration that complemented or integrated all the editions of the Divina Commedia that we could find. So it's a unique repository that doesn't exist anywhere else. So we assemble all these pictures in a way that, by looking at images as data, we do that in many other contexts. So we scrape data, for example, from Instagram, from the web, and then we treat them as data. And we reorder them, we filter them, we organize them semi-automatically to identify topics and clusters. So this is a kind of a semi-quantitative, qualitative approach to use these pictures as they were our cells in the Excel. Well, that is just to conclude a final experiment. That is, what if we designers start to play with data, really embracing some of the literature approaches? And then I want to close with something that may be interesting. That is an exercise that I asked to do to students is infopoesia. That means info poetry. So not to just make people see the phenomenon through the data, but also make them feeling it. So the definition I gave to infopoetry is that is a data-based communication artifact designed to both convey information and intentionally provoke an emotional response. It's weird, with data, but that's what I wanted to have. In order to get an audience, especially non-experts, interested and involved and eventually active towards an issue. There is always a kind of a lack of agencies with data visualization. So the idea is that without emotion, there is no interest, and without interest, there is no cognition. And they started to use metaphors. I love that. It was not part of the brief. They started to use metaphors, often like many different rhetorical figures. And then they went physical. Again, was not in the plan, but they started to do data physicalizations. Maybe, using sometimes really fragments of the phenomenon they were representing. This might be interesting for what I heard here, using pieces of the thing and use them as data somehow and visualize that. But again, was maybe not surprising, because if you read the definition of what poetry is, it has a lot to do with making. I didn't know that. I discovered that by trying to have this poetical approach. Some students came out with this. This is the number of days you lose if you smoke. So, and he did that by collecting actual cigarettes from the street, one by one. Each cigarette is a dot, is a day that you lose. But assembling that into this piece of art, this poem, physical, visual, concrete poetry. It was shocking. And it was not just visualized, it was physical, and it was also smelling very bad. That's me. Data smellification, that's the next frontier. Just last work, she decided, a student, to work with HIV data. It's still there. It's growing. Nobody knows that. Nobody talks about that, but it's there. And so she decided to use amount ink proportional to the data and use that in a basin of water and then shoot a film. Maybe because it's the end. That was the end. Can we just 5 seconds and then it's really the last slide. So the amount of ink is proportional to the data. You have healthy blood and infected blood, and they melt together. They really give you an idea of what happens. You know, these fluids that melt, and then the more, the darker blood is, of course, the problem. Then it becomes pervasive, and it, you know, fools the screen. It's time to wrap up. Thank you.